Well, good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Unashamedly Ethical quarterly webinar, where we promote ethics, values, and clean living. And I am so excited about today's webinar. For those of you that are with us already, you can join us by going onto our social media pages and registering using the link if you're trying to get others to join us, or you can simply go to the Unashamedly Ethical Facebook page, where we are live streaming the event. So if you have people that you would like to join, or you're finding the conversation engaging, the conversations will live on there for eternity, and you'll be able to refer back to us, engaging and learning from all the amazing panelists that we have today when we're speaking about the topic of future-proofing leadership in a global era. So today I have a number of distinguished guests and panelists with me, and in a minute I'm going to hand over to Anita Craig from Future Leadership to just engage with us with regards to these wonderful panelists. She's going to be introducing each panelist before they deliver their talk on the specific topic. And it is such a privilege for us to be sharing today with you this wonderful time of what we hope to be an empowerment to you as a leader, to be able to equip you and leave you hopefully feeling a little bit more, what shall we say, have a little bit more tools in the toolkit to be able to address some of the challenges and stubborn realities we face today in the world that we live in. In terms of just some housekeeping, folks, the program will look like the following. I'm going to conclude my welcoming and going to hand over to Anita to do just a brief welcome from her side and to do a brief introduction of the panelists. She will give a little bit more information before each panelist speaks. And then after that, she will also be sharing some of her thoughts. We do have a Q&A possibility. So if you're joining us on Facebook, you're welcome to post your questions into the comments on the Facebook live stream, or if you're joining us via Zoom, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you can click on and post a question to us. We will try to get through as many of the questions as possible in terms of this. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm sure you are not necessarily here to listen to me speak, and you've seen me on a number of the previous engagements. My name is Harry Loubser. I have the privilege of being part of the Unashamedly Ethical team. With me behind the scenes is Ulysses Geldenhuys, who handles our communications, and it is our privilege to engage with you as Unashamedly Ethical seeks to do three things. We want to create a platform for ethical organizations to flourish. We want to equip and empower leaders and organizations to be able to take a stand for ethics. And thirdly, we want to connect like-minded individuals and organizations to form a community that impacts society. If this sounds like something that you would like to get involved in, please reach out to us at www.unashamedlyethical.com or email us at info@unashamedlyethical.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for your time. Anita, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you so much, Unashamedly Ethical, for putting this all together and inviting us here today. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, my colleagues, friends, community, and thanks to all those who are participating today. Wonderful to know that you're out there from all parts of the globe and joining in this conversation. And I invite you to know that we learn from you as much as hopefully you're going to learn from us today, and let's reciprocate that here today. So I love just a little bit of the backstory, because for me it brings the human faces on the screen and the speakers to you in a humanistic way. And the connection here is that, one, we're all connected in global ways and on different levels, but also today, the connection here has been through people coming together as faculty and collaborators on the Master Leader Program. And it's with great delight that we've got these highly intelligent, skillful, and experienced people offering their time and their wisdom to share this freely with everyone today. And first up on that is my co-host, Larry Holmes, who sits in the United States. And just a short introduction here, because Larry really has lived a very rich life, but he brings practical wisdom to people where his experience has been both in the fields of psychology and individual and organizational leadership development, that a career that spanned over 40 years, both in the United States and living and working intensively in Australia. He's run his own business, and he's also been in practice psychology, and as well as being very steeped in his own spiritual journey, where he served as a monk for 8 years in the US. So this integration and this bridging of all these facets of life. And I'd love to introduce Larry to everyone, and take it away for us, Larry.
Thank you so much, Anita. You always make me seem like someone else. I hear her introduction and I think, well, that guy sounds nice. Yeah. Then I realize, oh, that's me. Yes, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to speak to you with my colleagues. I really, when I reflect on this topic, future proofing, that's the phrase that I've just reflected on quite a bit. And let me see if I can give you my basic thoughts. We're only going to spend a few, maybe 10 minutes talking about it. But what occurred to me was that if you're talking about future proofing leadership, I think it all comes back to the individual leader. And this is the work that I've been engaged with on many levels, as Anita said, throughout the years, the last few decades, in fact. Bottom line for me has always come back to the individual, not so much their technical skills, of which we would assume they have. Once a person reaches this level, senior management or developing, we know they have certain skills that have allowed them to move through all of the stages of management and leadership in any organization. But in my work with them, I've found that it's the inner development. So if you will, if we use the analogy of our current day, which we're using a lot of even now with technology, there's the hardware. So I don't know what piece of hardware you're working with on this, but if the software isn't up to date, if the software isn't working, you can throw the hardware out the window. So that's the analogy I want to start with. Future proofing is not about the hardware. It's not about the training, the education, the school, whatever. Yes, you have to have that. I couldn't be talking to you now without this piece of hardware. But without the software being updated, we're going to have a problem. And I think the transition right now for leaders is to recognize that, to say, I've got all of this experience, I know this, whether it's in a technological field, whether it's in sales, marketing, whatever that field is. So the analogy and the framework that I use to start on a broad 30,000 foot level is one that I have adopted from a fellow colleague at the University of Michigan, which is where I went. And he talks about the various paradigms of organizational life. And he says each individual comes in and they're working individually with technical skills. That's the first paradigm. And the key about paradigms is that it's the lens through which you see the world, through which you interact with the world. And so the individual technician, if you will, that comes in with a certain amount of skills, be it computer programming, be it sales, be whatever, they see the world through that lens. But that is, by its very nature, a limited lens. If they keep moving along in the organization and they move to the next level because management says, oh, this person is good. Graham's got some terrific skills. Nita's good. Let's promote her. Let's put her in charge of the department. So then that's the next paradigm. And that paradigm is, we could call it the management paradigm. So That paradigm then, rather than being technical, is transactional, because they have to work with the different parts of the organization to get something done. Fine. They see things through a lens as well, and that lens determines their take. But where we want to get to is what? When the organization sees a person and says, someone like Harry, and says, oh, this person is terrific, you know, we'd like to put him really in charge. We'd like to make him a leader. We'd like him to lead us forward into the future to create success for our organization. If we do that, what changes? What is the paradigm that shifts? And this paradigm word is an interesting word, isn't it? Because it's about the lens through which we see things. Now we're talking about a transformational paradigm. That is, the leader now is looking at what do we need to do, become, see, think, to enable us to be successful in the future. So the leader starts with some stage of a vision for the future, but they can't do it by themselves. They know that. A good leader understands that. So that leader, that transformational leader, understands it's about shift and change and adapting. And we know from the last, if not anything else, the last year and a half to 2 years, change can be upon us in any moment. Are we prepared for it? So this is the whole thing about a leader. A leader is someone who literally lives in the space of change and adaptation. One who is constantly working on themselves, not kidding themselves that things are going to become the same. You know, you hear that phrase. I always chuckle when I hear it. When are things going to return to normal? It just makes me smile. There is no normal. There is only the movement of things forward. And for a leader, it is, what is my vision of the movement for my group, my organization, my team, my family, that will enable us to thrive in the future? And so what do they have to do? Primarily, they have to work with people through that lens. So what they're constantly doing and engaging in is, in fact, I wrote something here. It just came to me. Leadership is not having all the answers, but creating an environment that unleashes the capacity or the ability in others to find those answers. So that's what the leader is doing. But unless that leader has developed themselves internally to that stage, there is no way that they can help the other people and the organization to get there. If one hasn't been empowered, if one hasn't grown, if one hasn't changed, they cannot help other people to do those things. So yes, they may start with a vision, but they know that they have to engage other people with that vision. Just a little snippet of an organization that I was working with now, I guess that was perhaps in the 80s, the largest organization in Australia. They could see, the leader could see that they would not survive. They were an organization in the telecommunications arena that had been around since the turn of the last century. And they knew that things were going to shift dramatically in the coming years. And they knew the culture of the organization wasn't such that they were going to be able to survive unless they could somehow or another shift the thinking and the behavior of an organization that was at the time 93,000 people. So they set about doing this work. So that leadership team got together and they did good work and they came up with a vision and they thought it was pretty good. And I would agree that it was a very forward-thinking vision. And one of the things we put to them was, okay, this is your vision. Don't you need the rest of the organization to come along to understand this, to maybe input? And they freaked. No, we've created this vision. It's perfect. It's just what we want. And we came back again and said, yes, 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 but you've got thousands of other people that you need to come along with that. And you could see the nervousness, the anxiety, but I guess we were convincing, and they thought, oh, okay, Now, we weren't going to have 93,000 people take a look at this document, but we did want to get a pretty good sampling of folks. So that was still going to be in the thousands. So we put it out there. And the leadership team was nervous. When it came back, literally after thousands had reviewed it, they did change it. They changed one word. One word. And they changed that word to we. We. So what was the lesson? The communication was we want this to be our vision. And the leaders sat back and they went, oh, a profound lesson. It was more than a changing of the one word we. It was the understanding that everyone wanted to be involved in this. And if that slowed things down in one sense, it sped things up in another sense. Because as I was saying in this statement, if you can unleash the organization and the people in the organization, things are going to just rush forward. But if you don't engage with them in a certain way, understanding that it's the, as it were, the power of the people that's going to make the change happen in the future. So if you want to future-proof leadership, leaders have to understand it's not just about them and what they want to happen. It's about how to engage others. So it's about the software of the leader understanding themselves. 2 points that I would say are critically important in my work with leaders around this is that leader needs to, one, and this seems obvious, but I think it's incredibly important. People who are sitting high in organizations, leading teams, departments, sections, or the whole organization, cannot simply rely on their position in the organization because they're, it's a management position, basically. What does leadership mean? What is it about? They have to choose to be a leader. So the first thing is choosing to be a leader, and that means understanding what leadership is. And it's the things that we're going to be talking about today. So that's first. The next thing is that leader has to operate from a sense of internal purpose and clarity. What is my purpose as a leader? And always in the last few decades that I've worked with leaders, it's one of the first questions that I ask. And often leaders are taken aback by that. And sometimes I'll be as bold as to ask that leader, what is the purpose of your life? And why do I ask that question? Because it's a question that fundamentally drives a person inside. To think about what is the purpose of my life? It is a deep and profound question. And then to say, and how does my leadership connect to that? And what are the talents and the skills and the experiences that I bring to bear in that space of leadership? Because that is what's going to make my leadership both foolproof and impactful. And if you're not willing to go there, and I will say this to a leader, if you're not willing to go there and engage with that inner journey, then I think maybe you're not ready for this. Not because you're not experienced, not because you're not talented, not because you're not intelligent in all of those ways, but for that space of leadership, you need to go there because fundamentally, whether you realize it or not, you're going to be asking your people to go there. You can't ask them to go any place where you haven't been yourself. I could go on, but let's stop there and hear from my distinguished colleagues.
That is so good. Thank you, Larry. I am going to steal the limelight here for a second. Firstly, to say that even if you didn't say anything profound, your voice alone is worth listening to. I think we can we can certainly put you forward as a voiceover artist. But wow, Larry, you've put forward some amazing gems for us, and I'll certainly be listening to the recording. Larry, we had one question to you, and I know that you potentially have to leave slightly earlier, so let me pose it to you now.
Sure.
Craig Bale asks, would you agree that organizational culture is part and parcel of the software that you are referring to?
Beautiful. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I when I say creating an environment that is a culture, absolutely. And the culture is what's inside. And a culture, if you take all of the individual behaviors, individuals' values, uh, that exist within individuals, now we've got to pull together a group or a culture that's aligned. And I want to use this word quite specifically. In other words, we're not asking everyone to think exactly alike. We simply need them to be aligned around a larger purpose. And that is what we mean by culture, that the basic values, the morals, the integrity, if you will, Harry, is aligned. And I think that's where a lot of work hasn't been done, or enough hasn't been done. So the work, and that's where I find myself working a lot, by the way, in organizations, that yes, I may work with individual leaders, but then I'm always saying to the leaders, it is your responsibility to create the proper culture that is going to align the people in this organization such that they can achieve the vision. So he's spot on. That's exactly right.
That's
and
so
alignment.
good.
Just get everybody going the same way.
I think the question about, we all have morals and values to some degree, but finding the collective around that space, and like you said, creating an environment where people feel like, hey, my values and morals are heard in this space, and therefore I align myself to this process because I am connected in that sense to this organization, really makes sense for me. And my own personal journey with leadership have certainly learned that the hard way as a young man, just barging forward and saying my way or the highway, right? And unfortunately, that seldom gets the job done if you're looking for a long-term effective strategy. Larry,
You hit
thanks
it
for
on the
sharing.
head, Harry. Thank you so much.
Larry, thanks for sharing that. I'm gonna ask Anita to introduce our next panelist. Thank you.
Beautiful opening. Thanks, Larry. You set the scene and the stage, and I think you've got a great follow here, Graham, with your piece that I know is coming up next. But just to introduce Graham Smale, Graham has had over 35 years of experience in the financial markets, very much in the corporate sector and field up here in Johannesburg, South Africa. In a variety of roles, which have covered both technical aspects as well as fulfilling executive roles, and very much in the financial sphere, so that left brain of logic, of rationale, structure, risk management, processes, systems, etc. And then he switched direction, and his career became a self-directed one from inquiry of development and growth of the individual. And he studied and specialized in coaching and facilitating, applying now more of the right brain field sphere and educating himself in creative problem solving, thinking out of the box, studying innovation, design thinking, problem solving innovation. And this was all in the context of wanting to go back in and partner with organizations as a consultant to develop a competency and a different way of being of organizations, aligning their innovation processes with organizational strategy to make a difference. So really interested in hearing Graham's take and angle on this. And he's a very observant faculty member, part of the Master Leader Program. And I always listen very keenly to what Graham has to say in his latest research and findings. Welcome, Graham.
Thanks, Anita. I'm going to start off with a little story. So if you could go back in time, 1982, there's a young, eager engineer who's showing promise, and he gets elected to go on a management development conference and program. Quite an old paradigm called the management grid approach, but it was fascinating. And one of the exercises in the program was around sort of attributes of a company, and what you were asked to do is to sort of rank an excellent company and rank your own company. So needless to say, the rankings were upside down of the good company versus our company. And because this engineer sort of opened his mouth a bit much, and it was a difficult topic that was going to be presented to the executive at the end of the program, I kind of got voted to do that. So it was me, the engineer, and did the presentation to the executive. So pre all the electronic stuff, whiteboard, white flip chart up at the front of the group, talking through this exercise, and then sort of the final slide. I'm laughing because it's just remembering back to the exercise, how naive I was. Sort of the result was, in other words, how to solve all these problems that we had as an organization. Flip the chart and the big bright red letters, change your management style. Ta-da! Needless to say, at the cocktail party after that session, nobody talked to me. Anyway, that was the start of a long journey of being fascinated by everything business. But it's only in sort of more recent times that I've become fascinated more in the people side. I came to realize that I was living a life strategy that went something like this. It's blindingly obvious to me. Why is it not blindingly obvious to you? Subtext, you idiot. And that was quite a discovery. And that was the sort of start of my journey of shifting. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. And there are a couple of slides I've put together that I think can give some context to what we're talking about today. So, very quickly, what kind of reality are we living in right now? And they're really just, it's encapsulated with an over-hackneyed term of we live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this is the dimensions that we as individuals, all the way through to leaders of organizations, have to cope with. And it's only getting worse. The last couple of years, a demonstration of that. And the old strategies no longer work. Working smarter, working harder, they're no longer enough. But I think there's some interesting trends that are happening in sort of the leadership space and the leadership development space that could be useful to throw into the mix here. So one is that historically organizations have kind of taken the ownership of developing their people, the language that, you're a resource and we need to optimize and develop you. So therefore the organization took responsibility, but I think there's a strong shift for development from the organization back onto the individual in terms of their own development. Alongside that, technology and the internet and development of the personal learning cloud and micro-learning is, I think, having a significant impact on the way we train, develop our people and leaders as well. And then alongside that, what the cloud allows to happen is sort of separating low-touch skills and competency learning from transformation journeys and being able to do those alongside those. And the transformation journeys requires a much higher touch approach. And the next trend, I think, is the shift from the cult of the leader, the individual leader at the top of an organization as being the answer to all the problems of the organization, and more to a collective leadership. Another significant trend is a shift from sort of pyramidal control hierarchies to distributed networks. And sort of my journey over the last few years is starting to come to realize that the emotional and somatic side of being a leader is where the new cutting edge and frontier of both personal and leadership development sits. So what does all this mean, those sort of trends as a backdrop to what we need to do as developers of leaders and developers of self? Well, I think, first of all, I declare my sort of basic premise that I come from, which is that innovation and becoming a learning organization are core to sort of future business survival. And when I think of innovation, it's not only about product or service or about operations. We need to innovate how we exist as human beings and how we each as individuals grow and develop. So off the back of that premise, one of the fundamental points that I think is important for organizations is that human development in its broader sense and the inner journey that Larry talks about has to become a core process at the heart of the enterprise. And for me, what this starts to look like and feel like is helping people shift from knowing about to being. So for example, what's the difference between knowing about design thinking to being a design thinker? What's the difference between knowing about leadership, and there are thousands of models for all of these things, and being a leader? And that's an intensely inner and personal journey for everybody. And the other piece is that we talk about the inner journey and going inside. The other piece that I think is missing is helping organizations develop the interpersonal level. Now, you can think of an organization as a group of human beings who, through individual and collective action, live out the purpose of that enterprise or organization. And so less and less it is about individual action and more about group coordination of action. And that fundamentally sits in conversational technology. And when I use conversational technology, I include both language, which is talking and listening. It includes emotions and includes the body as part of that, the physiology as part of that journey. So those I think are also the software type technologies that need to be developed. And I think what we used to call the soft skills are now the hard skills, and they're hard because they're hard to develop. Human beings don't learn by being told; they learn by experience. So that's the sort of final piece: is this journey of development. You have to learn your way into this way of being of a leader. But that's my sort of my pitch, so to speak, Anita. Happy sort of open discussion, or we can move on to the next person.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Graham. So I think one of the questions that is being asked is do employers give enough attention to the points that you've just raised, and specifically where Larry was referring to alignment, and if not, could you perhaps help us just, some of the leaders out there asking the question about, are we spending enough time when we are busy with the employment phase in these aspects that you've just raised? How can employers do that? Because I mean, usually it's this 10-minute situation or half an hour or hour, and sometimes corporates do invest, 2-3 sessions and bring in people. Is there some advice you can give, or just scenarios maybe that you can discuss there?
I think there are a couple of things. So unfortunately, it involves more meetings. You particularly use that term because what we're not doing is spending the right time in the right way, having the conversational dialogues. So organizations get massively trapped into what's the problem today, what's the problem that has to be fixed tomorrow, and never build the cadence into their structures around having these longer term conversations around what's going right, what's going wrong, and how do we shift. I think one of the hardest parts as a leader, I think is really, really hard being a leader in the sort of the modern VUCA-based world, because in the morning, you've got to put on your logical, rational, efficiency and effectiveness hat. And then at lunchtime, you've got to go out and smoke something or drink something, and then come back in the afternoon and take that hat off. And then spend the rest of the day doing the other stuff, the innovation, the talking, the longer term planning, and getting that alignment. Now, for me, each organization has to find its own path in this way. One of the things that I fight against is the sort of consulting mindset that says, well, we'll come in, we'll talk to your organization, talk to your people, and then we'll mix in our magic pixie dust that we've gathered through best practice by talking to people all over the world, and we'll come back with a report that works for you. For me, and that's why I've shifted much more into a facilitative type of role, is that I have a deep fundamental belief that if the people in the system are not involved in creating the answer, nothing will change. That's the one premise.
That's profound. Can you repeat that just quickly? I think people missed it.
So, and so what I'll also add to it is that people often use, Einstein has the statement that says, you can't solve the problem with the same level of thinking that caused the problem. But most people translate that in, you can't fix the problem with the people who caused the problem. I have a fundamental disagreement with that premise. What you have to do is help people shift their thinking from the way where they were thinking before into a new way of thinking. And it's some of those pieces that are not missing. We just say, look, this is the way, this is the way I used to operate. It's blindingly obvious to me. Why is it not blindingly obvious to you? We're not giving people the tools and processes on how to shift who they are as human beings. Even something as simple as replacing a CRM system in an organization. The people who are living in that business, using that CRM system compared to what they were doing before, have to become different human beings at some level. And we're not giving them the tools to do that. So it's for me, it starts with one conversation, which leads to a second conversation, which leads to a third conversation. And the leader has to get off their high horse,
Yeah,
and listen.
this is something profound about what you're sharing, because as a person and the inner reflection that we're speaking about, if I'm an introvert or an extrovert, I might be better strengthened, if I can use some of that generic terminology.
Yeah.
I might be easily acquainted to people and wanting to engage with folks. Whereas if I'm an introvert or not that way, I'll just say, well, that's not my personality. The reality is your organization depends on it for you to engage with people. And I think it does require us to some level to shift our thinking and in some cases a traditional way of thinking to this new space. I want to just give maybe a minute. Is there other comments on this topic that anybody wants to chime in on before we do move on to the next panelist? Or Graham, if you have any other comments?
No, I'd like to give my panelists some opportunity here.
Good.
I certainly can say, totally agree with what Graham is saying, and certainly from that point of view of doing to being. And I think a lot of the work is about helping people to, it's not so much that they're becoming someone else. It is that they're lifting their awareness. It's like when the new software comes out, you don't throw it all out,
Yeah.
It's upgraded. And so I think it's, again, to speak in those terms, it's like upgrading. It's like we keep upgrading. So a child, when they're going through the educational process, they don't go from grade 5 to 6 and throw out all of 5, but they have to keep growing. And when they go to college, university, they're doing a similar thing. I think if people could understand within an organization, like leaders, that it's continuing to grow and expand as a human being, and to enter into that engagement and to support people in that development, I think is the key, such that now our conversations in the morning, afternoon, and the evening sometimes, they're operating at a higher level of being and understanding. And then you realize that the initial extra time that it takes, to develop new software, for example, ultimately it's going to save time.
Yeah.
So you invest time, and this is what leaders sometimes are hesitant to do. They're hesitant to invest the time in people's upliftment and growth because, we've got so much to do. We can't. But if you did the same thing, and some of us, myself included, at times are like that with our computers, we go, I don't have time to upgrade, you know what I mean? And the next thing you know, systems are falling apart, aren't they? So this is all I'm saying. I'm saying that you have to give that initial time, and then you are going to save time. And then you're going to have people who, because they've grown, can really, really give you, and they can help you. And then, as Graham was also talking about, you're creating a whole leadership team. You've got people out there who are eager, have the capacity to lead. And now you're allowing them to do that. And the conversation is about not what are we doing, but how are we doing it? And who are we in the doing of it? All of those things.
Yeah. If you're going to bake a cake, you will have to have your recipe right, but also the timing right. It's not just a case of throwing everything into a bowl and hoping for the best. And it's so great to hear you all just comment on these various topics. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask that Anita introduces our next panelist, and then hoping that we'll have some time for more engaging conversation. Anita, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen. And now we're going to switch over to the ladies, to the women. And interestingly enough, Tamu is a diversity and inclusion strategist and practitioner who has global experience in leading inclusive organizational change and human resources. Most recently, she was exec director of inclusion and equity for New York University in Abu Dhabi. And she's also had a career as Deputy Director of Human Resources, and including 20 plus years in similar positions at NYU in New York. So Tamu, we're really looking forward to hearing your take through this lens today. And and hearing your viewpoints from a rounded educational leadership perspective. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. I start today just being really, really happy. I was already delighted to be a part of this endeavor, but I have to tell you now, I'm really thrilled having listened to both Larry and Graham, because what strikes me is that is how much we are all on the same page. We are coming from different sectors, certainly from different spheres of influence, and different, we each have a different focus. But I think what you're going to find is that we are going to sound a bit like a broken record. And I mean that in the best possible sense, and I'll tell you why. Larry, your focus was absolutely on the leader and the initial aspect of the leader's self-development as being really key to ways in which leaders can empower themselves to indeed lead and to empower their stakeholders. And you talked about doing the inner work. Graham, you mentioned somatic intelligence and human development as being the most important trends when it comes to how leaders can move forward and bring their groups along with them and accomplish the things that they do. And I think you both talked about the need for really investing. What you were really talking about was investing in the people who are doing the work. A little bit of a story. I was with an organization once where we developed a new strategic plan. Bright and shiny thing, lots of bells and whistles. I mean, we invested so much time and energy into this, including spending time gathering feedback from our constituents. Of course, the majority of the feedback was probably technical in nature, how to build a better this and how to improve, process improvement sort of ruled the day. And so we got ready to plan our launch of this plan. And I said, hold on a minute. We are about to engage in what some might call, just really, an exercise of revolutionary change. And yet we have done very little to invest in the very people who we are depending upon to make this thing go. So we did that. We took a step back, and in point of fact, that initial investment was then foregrounded as being absolutely key to how we were going to make the changes happen that we needed to make happen. How were we going to, the old adage about if you always do what you always did, the rest. So how, in fact, were we going to rely on people to accomplish all of these new and great things if we did not stop and take a look at the tools that they were going to need in order to begin shifting how they did themselves, in fact, how they even saw themselves as parts of the organization, and how the organization itself defined its core values as far as people are concerned. So my approach is, again, very much in sync with what you've heard so far, but I want to start with just spending a moment talking about a very important force in today's world, in today's VUCA world. Thank you very much, Graham. And that is globalization. So, globalization we all know what the key drivers are: technological innovation, business expansion, multinational economic development, advances in travel, communication, work-induced migration. And I will point to the educational sector because as long as we know that people have migrated to other countries for the purposes of work, we also have to look at the parallel, in terms of education. We know that for almost centuries, people have traversed the globe to other locations to study. And so what globalization has done is sped up all of that kind of development, and so that it moves at such breakneck speed now that it has developed dimensions that encompass everything from the political to the social, the economic, ecological, environmental, and cultural forces that impact the lives of people almost everywhere. Now, how are we then going to translate what happens to a workforce, let's say, or any team or group of people operating in an organization as a result of the impact of globalization? Well, one of the first things is just look around. Who's with you? Almost any locale, and I have to say almost because nothing is absolute, but many, in fact, most locales these days have people who have come from somewhere else into that environment. We used to say that all politics is local, and indeed, local even means something a little bit different than it used to. So, for example, if you think about all of the activities of leadership, everything from goal setting, visioning, strategic planning, establishing and solidifying structure, or motivating and empowering teams, indeed producing the results that leaders are expected to produce. Any and all of these require the leader to have the capacity for recognizing and then embracing the fact that cultural forces, with all of their manifestations, are going to increasingly operate within their environment. Now, what do I mean by that? So again, as I said, look around and see who's with you and ask the question, where did that person come from? Even if you are operating within what you may think is the most homogeneous of environments, I can guarantee you that everyone has not had the same experience. And in fact, everyone has not been shaped in the same ways. So that one of the things that we must first begin to realize is that we all are made up of multiple identities. We each have, of course, a personal identity, and that's probably the one that we are most cognizant of. But every person has a cultural identity. You know, it's interesting when you go down the grocery aisle in a store, you'll come upon, and I'm speaking purely from a US context here, but there may be other parallels. You come upon an aisle in most US cities in a grocery store that says ethnic foods. And that often makes me chuckle when you hear the terms ethnic studies or ethnic populations, because I say to myself, well, doesn't everyone have an ethnicity? And that's really the point, is that each of us has a cultural identity. Each of us has a social identity. We are the sum total of where we were born, where we then grew up, who raised us, where were we educated, and in what kind of educational systems? What was the socialization process that taught us, for example, what no means, what yes means, how to perform mundane tasks? Each of those can be as diverse as the very individuals we are. And so I go back to saying, in terms of future-proofing strategies for leaders, leaders need to absolutely recognize that they must deal with the cultural forces that are at play within their organizations. And so I have a premise that says that key to future-proofing the effectiveness of leaders is their capacity for understanding that intercultural development and the practice of intercultural fluency is a quintessential skill for not just the 21st century, but I think it's here to stay. Now, over, I guess at this point, half a century ago, there was Peter Drucker, early management strategist, and people have debunked many of his theories and practices and so forth, and let's say we've moved on. But Peter Drucker, and we don't want to discount his very salient contributions, Peter Drucker said something that I think has ever more resonance, and that is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. How many times have we observed really infamous examples of business derailments that result from intercultural short-sightedness? So while the approach of some organizations is to put in place a diversity or diversity, equity, and inclusion team, and so they would be the folks that handle issues to keep the organization out of legal trouble, eventually that strategy wears very thin because it's not based on any notion of what both Larry and Graham talked about in terms of developing the individual, recognizing that cultural identity, that personal identity, the social identity. We have to recognize that those identities actually exist and that the worldviews and paradigms and lenses that Larry mentioned that we each look through are shaped very much by those social and cultural identities. Now, I'm certainly not advocating that, when you get ready to travel, you want to learn something about the culture that you're going to be traveling to. And the simplest forms of that are, of course, picking up a few phrases that we can then use to, find our way to where we need to go. It would be really conveying the wrong message to say that the development of intercultural fluency meant learning about, hundreds of places and their cultural habits and so forth. It's not that at all. But intercultural fluency refers to developing the capacity to navigate in other cultural contexts. Now, what enables you to do that is not that you're familiar with the do's and don'ts of that culture, but that number one, you recognize yourself as a cultural being, and you understand that the ways in which you think are very culturally derived. That's going to mean that the ways that other people think are also culturally derived. We all kind of have had an experience with a coworker that we thought was, not quite all there, shall I say, tactfully. And people often say, what's wrong with him? Culture also includes a recognition of the impact of trauma, so that a better question for us to learn to ask is, I wonder what happened to him. So all of the ways that culture operates in our workplaces and organizations and on sports teams and in any kind of interaction where there is more than one human being, is fed by all of these influences in our lives. And the degree to which leaders can, first of all, begin to recognize that they too are cultural beings and that their decisions, in fact, the directions that they issue and everything that they do for that organization is going to be seen through a cultural lens, intended or not. So to go back to what do we do to future-proof leadership, one of the things that I would say has to happen is that the organization needs to develop itself, as Graham mentioned, as a learning organization. And that learning needs to include the comprehensive awareness, some comprehensive awareness education. In fact, a comprehensive awareness education plan that includes investing in individuals and providing them with the opportunity to develop their intercultural fluency, which, by the way, is an ongoing life's journey. It certainly is not something that happens overnight. We're really talking about the long game here. And investing in people is something that really takes time and energy. I used to, in my work, talk with managers, very successful people, and I worked in the academic sector. And so sometimes those managers were scientists or theoreticians or other very successful academics who would say to me, I can't get my work done because I have to manage this person, or I have someone on my team, or I'm not getting results because I have to take too much time out of what I'm doing to then manage people. And it always took me back because I had to stop and think, now, how am I going to communicate to this person that, guess what, that is your work? That is, in fact, how you're going to get your work done, is that you're going to invest in this person so that they become a part of your team and that they understand what it is that you're aiming for. They're going to understand it because you're going to take the time to explain it in a way that they can grasp. And you're going to take the time to raise your lens, your intercultural lens, to assess how well are we communicating and what might be some obstacles to that communication. So for example, what does this look like within organizations? I've already mentioned the need to develop a comprehensive awareness education plan that everyone in the organization must partake of. As a matter of fact, you learn about it before you join the organization. When you look at the profile of the organization and you are invited to apply, or however you come in, if you come in as a contractor or an affiliate, you are going to know that one of the core values of that organization is intercultural competency development or intercultural fluency. The term I most prefer is intercultural humility, which recognizes that everyone in the organization has something to offer. So you need that. And again, I've mentioned core values. You need to make sure that incorporated into your core values is something that says, in this organization, we recognize the value of human contribution. You also need, which involves, by the way, developing a whole curricula. And I do use that term because it's just that involved. People learn in different ways. There must be offerings that can be accessed at different times, both electronically and manually, both in person and self-directed learning. In addition to that, there has to be modeling. If my leader has put in place, lots of systems, shall we say, to reinforce these values, but those are not the behaviors that I'm seeing exhibited by members of his or her or their leadership teams, then there's going to be a disconnect. And I'm going to stop because now I'm going to develop a trust issue. Trust is one of your best friends as a leader. How do you develop that trust? There are lots of factors that impact it, but one of the things is, as your constituent, I need to know that you care about me. Leaders are often interested in loyalty. And as a leader, every now and then you're going to run into a scenario where loyalty is important. You want to know, are people on board? Are they going to support your ideas, your strategies, and so forth? The degree to which I can do that has a lot to do with how much I trust you. And how much I trust you has a lot to do with whether or not I think you can see me. You can see me as a part of your organization. And more importantly, I can see myself reflected in that organization. So the modeling is important. And then the accountability. The things that are really important are the things that we hold people accountable for. One of the questions I ask organizations when I work with them is, okay, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a sense of belonging are values that you say are important to your organization. So if they are, how will I know that? How do those things show up in the day-to-day of your organization? How am I going to know that those are the things that are important? I should be able to know it actually without reading anything. Yeah. Or without being told, a set of, we have our mission vision statements. I need to feel it. I need to feel it as I'm interacting with individuals and as I'm doing all of the work that I'm doing. So I can stop there because I think I've made some of the key points that I wanted to bring home. And I can engage with anyone who has a question or who might want to weigh in on what I've shared.
Yeah, well, I'm going to need a week to digest all of that, at least. That was amazing. Some comments from our panelists before I ask a question from the audience.
I think there's one really important point in order to do all of this is the safety of the environment. That's a part of culture, is how safe do people feel. In principle, asking for loyalty and fealty is you're actually not going to find out what you need to find out. You actually want people who disagree with you. You want people who don't like what you're doing. You want people, but that takes a different form of leader to be able to take that on board. And the environment's got to be safe so that when you stick above the parapet, you don't get this whistling sound between your ears just because the bullet's gone straight between the two. It's happened to me a number of times. And so what do you do next time? You just shut up. You never say anything. So my understanding is that that's the single biggest factor around culture. And how do you diagnose it? How do you find out where it's not safe? And the leaders have the biggest role to display safety.
Absolutely, Graham. I couldn't agree more. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest sources of learning on any team going through a change management initiative are the resistors. What are the reasons why they're resisting the change? I absolutely believe that the degree to which organizations send signals internally that they don't want to hear from people is absolutely related to the degree of success that they're going to be able to experience in any of the endeavors that they engage in. So safety is an important component of inclusiveness, as a matter of fact. It's one of the things that defines how inclusive the environment actually is how safe do I feel? Not only do I need to feel trusted and listened to and respected and valued, but I also absolutely need to feel safe, because only then am I going to bring my full and authentic self into the environment. So absolutely agree with you 100%.
Sure. Tamu, just a question that is being asked. What advice would you give to a leader that has unfortunately found himself or herself in a position where her organization, the culture, has eaten the strategy for breakfast, so the saying goes? What advice would you give for someone to try and pull this back and bring it to a place of our core values is collective and inclusive, and we are looking at things like cultural awareness, creating an atmosphere where everybody feels welcome and included, and are able to contribute in their own unique way, without feeling like I'm just another cog in the wheel and you're just trying to force me into a role here?
I think I start by going back to the proverbial elephant in the room. So as a leader, if this is the environment that I wake up and find myself in, and I use that term on purpose, right? Then what am I not seeing? What is it that's all around me that everyone else knows, but I haven't seemed to recognize? So I start with transparency. And for that, you need dialogue, again, with the safety factor that Graham mentioned, because for some reason that must not have been apparent before, or else how did we get here?
Yes.
So there has to be a great deal of listening, and what I call empowered listening, not just people being invited to listen, but they have to really believe that not only do you want me to listen, but that's actually how you've recognized that that's how you're going to begin to understand where are we and how did we get here. So I would start with a great deal of transparency. Again, we've already touched on the need for input from your stakeholders. They have to be able to see themselves in the change. And in point of fact, as Graham mentioned, you need people around you who are going to tell you the truth, because without that, we go nowhere. Leaders today have to steel themselves to listening to the things that they really don't want to hear. They must hear those things, because without that, then we're all kind of, still asleep and, not going anywhere.
I think someone commented humility is a necessary precondition for meaningful success, which I think ties into that somewhat that it's a core value for us to have, is humility in this space. We are moving towards the end, folks, and I think I want to ask, and I want to give Anita some time just to share her thoughts with us. And as she's mentioned, a lot of these wonderful panelists have been a part of a journey with her in her process of creating faculty for an organization that she drives, and a leadership institute that she's looking at. And Tamu, thank you for sharing. Thank you for, and I'm hoping we could get some more time just for some input, but it's been fantastic so far. That was a incredible session, and all our panelists so far. But Anita, I've had the privilege of engaging with you on a number of occasions, and when we're talking about values, certainly you as a person and our engagements so far have said to me, wow, this is a person that understands conscious leadership on a very deep level. And we are so excited for you to share some of your thoughts with us. Over to you, Anita.
Thank you, Harry. And sometimes great going last. And sometimes I feel like, well, everything's been said. What more value can I add? But I'll put in my 5 cents worth. I included a couple of slides just to pose. I decided to take kind of a high level perspective of things. And I'm just going to share, I'm going to share my PowerPoint here. If you guys could just let me know if you can view it.
Yes, indeed, we can clearly see.
Okay, good. So, you know, taking the perspective of future leadership, especially call it in this current pandemic, you know, which is the reality that we are facing, where most of us have, like in the picture here, found ourselves sometimes balancing on one limb and facing this vast ocean of, just wow, looking out there to beyond the horizon line and not sure what is coming next. But for me, looking at it from an organizational perspective, there are a couple of things that I wanted to just talk through here. It looks like sharing is paused, so sorry, I'm going to just resume there. It seemed like there was a bit of an error there. We now need to embrace what we're talking about as emergent future options. And by options, it's like none of us are certain. We've spoken about the VUCA mentality, the VUCA world out there. And I think it really is for us sensing, feeling, intuiting. It's almost more of the feminine aspect of leadership and the way that the world is now leaning towards in terms of sensing and feeling into what's emergent. You know, when we began designing a 9-month leadership program, this was all pre-COVID, and we were pretty clear in our directionality. We were pretty clear in terms of what the need was out there, and COVID came and it's disrupted our worlds so dramatically. I'm speaking both personally and from the perspective of just hearing this from many others. And that is that often we don't know what's coming the next day. And so
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, my Siri's interfering
okay.
here. Goodbye, Siri.
What shall we say about technology? Thank you.
Yeah, don't swear at him, Bruce. He won't answer the question.
And the second is something around these cohesive whole teams. And to Tamu's point, it's really about the inclusion of the diversity that's sitting around the table, because the table these days is global. And how do we develop whole teams that have the capacity to hold all these parts for the organization to thrive? And it's actually looking for those differences. It's looking for the diversity. It's looking for the rub that's going to help the organization or the team or that function or that unit to come together in a way that produces its best result. And for me now in the world, it's all about transformational leadership. I think most of us understand transactional leadership really well, referring to that hardware, software piece. But the transformational leadership space is something that organizations and also the individual cannot ignore anymore. And to Graham's point that he was speaking to earlier, it's now the shift from it being the organization's responsibility to actually, for me, each person, each being, each leader, starting to take what I call transformational and radical ownership for their own development. Because actually, at the end of the day, we are our own curriculum. The curriculum's not out there. We are our own lives, our own stories, our own backgrounds, all the sum of the parts. And it's up to us to take those reins and to take that radical responsibility for transforming ourselves, as much as it is for organizations to support that and enable it and encourage it and invest in it in their leadership and their people in their organizations. Point number 4 for me is about being relevant. And I think COVID has been the biggest shake up and wake up for all organizations to really get a sense check through the hard reality of, are you relevant to lead and to be in existence and to continue your services and your offerings? Are they relevant to where the world is going and where it's needed? The 5th element for me is developing resilience and an adaptive and agile workplace, workforce mindsets. And I'm afraid my screen for some reason has frozen here, so forgive me. I'm just going to try and press a few buttons here to get going again. It's just taking a moment to reset.
All good.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, it's still cutting out. Sorry, guys. So I came up with, just for the purpose of this discussion today, a 4P leadership framework. And the first is purpose-driven. If an organization, as well as an individual, is not clear on their purpose and the direction and their reason for being in existence and their reason for being there to serve or to offer their services, their products, etc., one really is lost in the dark. So from the outset, get really clear on purpose. Linked to that will be obviously a revisiting of the values of that organization and the mission and the vision. But for me, purpose-driven is being called to the foreground first and foremost for everyone. And I think COVID has actually been an opportunity for us to really look more deeply and do an internal gaze in terms of what is our collective purpose for here being on this planet, and then working right down to the micro level of the individual. The second is people. And here, we're speaking about, future fit leadership. And for me, it's about conscious leadership development. And I can speak at length to that, but it's really what a lot of my colleagues have been saying on the call today. We can talk about it in terms of the broader, the horizontal and the vertical development. We can talk about the inner and the outer journey. We can talk about it from an integral perspective of from the I, the me, to the interpersonal, the we, or the relational field, and then back into the organization, which is the system at large. But people are at the heart. And for me, the call to leadership now and to organizations more so than ever before is a journey that I call the journey that is southbound. And it's moving from the intellect, from the head. There's so much knowledge out there. There's so much intellect. We've got it all at our fingertips, this information age, the big data mindsets and the big mind. But it's now the call to the south, to the heart. And this is about the care that we extend. And it's that human approach and that human-centric approach. And I think, again, in this time of the pandemic, it's become apparent that if this is dry, the heart, then the action is not going to follow, because people are going to disengage and you're not going to get that discretionary effort and the motivation from employees. Then thirdly, for me, the third P that's very important is planet. And here it's talking about the welfare. So we're thinking beyond ourselves. There are great movements that have arisen in the world, and one of them is called the B Corp. And their business is a force for good. And more organizations are signing up to become forces for good, because they're realizing that the importance through their purpose is through the service to others. And whether it's a business to businesses exchange or consumers or individuals, it doesn't matter. But it's how can I best serve the planet? There's so many issues that we're facing together, but we all have common ground and we all live here. And it's either how can we do good or at least reduce the harm that we're doing. And it takes away that selfish mind and replaces it with more of a selfless mindset. You know, in the past, it would have been charities and non-profit organizations and NPOs that had this kind of mindset. But now the for-profit organizations are really needing to learn these lessons and take it on board, and reshift and re-gear and reorient their organizations to being much more conscientized around how they do business, why they're doing business, and then with whom they're doing business. And then the fourth for me, which seems again to be somehow the technicalities of these slides are playing up here, but the fourth thing for me then is profit. So of course, money is good. We need to make profit to keep the wheels turning and to keep profitable and healthy, that we can also pay our employees correctly and, you know, not get into debt and downward spirals and things like that. But profit is the fourth. It's not upfront. It's not the first. So we're not led by greed. We're not led by finances alone. That is not our motivation. That actually becomes the end game of things. So that was really what I wanted to share with everyone today, just in a nutshell. You know, we can focus in on the people development side, because that's essentially what is my passion as an educator and a disruptor in the field and a conscious community builder. But I think the holistic picture for me is bringing in those different elements. So open to taking any questions from either my panelists, colleagues, and or the audience out there.
Awesome, 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 awesome is all I can say. Some questions or comments from the panelists before I go over into questions from the audience?
Yeah, so Anita, thanks very much for that. And what for me that calls into highlighting is that requires lots of conversations. I get back to sort of the conversational interpersonal intelligence required. So if the leadership kind of wakes up and then wants to do all these wonderful things, they're behaving in exactly the way they were before. They've just shifted what they're going to do, and then they push it down on the organization. So once again, is how do the leaders, my view is that each organization has to find its own version of people, planet, profit, There's no fixed formula for this. And a leader sitting at the top can't edict it, and it has to evolve organically. Using the sort of complexity framework of Snowden's, all of the stuff we sit in the world of complexity, where before the fact you can't know what the answer is. And so organizations as a living system of human beings has to iterate and learn and experiment what those four things mean, so that they can articulate it in their own language, define in purpose and vision and what they do then on a day-to-day basis. That's for me is why conversational intelligence, the ability to have these conversations and figure it out collectively, really important.
I couldn't agree with you more, Graham. Thank you for adding that. And yes, absolutely, because, you know, consciousness is not on one layer or one level. It is this evolutionary process and expands on a continuum upwards. And there's many models that one can work with effectively in organizations to understand as a dipstick or an assessment, where is the organization's consciousness residing? Now, one can use different language as well. You know, there's Barrett's values model, there's Graves's spiral dynamics model, there's Wilber's integral model, all quadrants, all lines of development. But I would definitely encourage people to start inquiring into it and just getting curious. There's no wrong or right, and there's no start or finish to this either. It's a journey, and it's a lifetime journey, both for the individual and the context of the organization. But the investment, coming back to your point, Graham, and I think the other panelists' point is that the investment in the self, it's the self's journey, actually, that creates this upward spiraling and creates new possibilities and creates and opens this continuum for growth and maturity in leadership as well. So it really boils back down to that individual taking the first step on their journey, or the next step on their journey, whatever that mean or may look like for you.
Sure. Some good stuff. Tamu, did you want to comment?
Just to say, Anita, I love that you invoked the notion of journey, because I think it's absolutely the reality that each of us is living, whether we are open to it or awake to it or not, is that we are on a journey. And if we are, if we're so blessed or so able, a developmental journey, and one that is not stagnant and certainly doesn't happen in one dimension. It's certainly multidimensional, and the degree to which our organizations support the notion of each of us being on a journey is absolutely correlated in the ultimate success of the organization. So I really like that you invoked that for where we are today, especially you know, the VUCA-ness of the world, is that that journey is often from here traveling southward. I absolutely love that notion. Thank you.
So good. Folks, we're about to start wrapping up, and I want to give each of the panelists a 30-second to 1 minute brief moment just to share a closing thought. Before I go there, I want to ask the question that one of the people asked us: where does ethics fit into all of this? You know, we're speaking about core values and drivers, and I'm going to take a stab at what I've written down in a research paper that I did recently in terms of a definition. And here's some of the answers I got. And it's the definition of ethics is moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. And then Chief Justice said it well for me, of the US Supreme Court, Potter Stewart. This is a while ago. He said ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. And I love that definition. And I think for me, when I hear what we're doing today, is we're creating a bit of awareness around values and cultures and understanding we need to create capacity for us to embrace other cultures and create a space where everybody has an opportunity to express themselves for the greater good, to Anita's point to some degree, you know, so making sure we look after the planet and various other aspects. I think that is something that I hear, is that when we gather our morals together, and we create a set of values, we're able to hopefully come up with a set of ethics that we're able to live according to. But maybe just some comments from each of you around this question. But as we do that, I think we need to start wrapping up. So I'm going to ask. I'm going to start with Graham, and then Tamu, and then Anita. And I'm going to ask you each just to deliver your closing comments. And then, as a request from our audience, please, if you can tell us where to get a hold of you, that'll be amazing, or more information about the work that you do. Over to you, Graham.
Harry, do you want sort of the closing on ethics, or on just a general closing?
You can comment on that as well, but in general, also just a close from your side then. Yeah.
So for me, ethics are you know, the choices that a group of people consider on what is right and what is wrong. There are some absolutes. So, for example, "thou shalt not kill" is a pretty good one, not for everybody to live by. But it becomes the graduations from then onwards, and it's up to the group to, when there's the law, of course, on what, you know, in the standards and stuff like that. But ultimately, the nuances have to be talked about, and what is right and what is wrong in the context. When we say the customer is always right, what does that mean? What is the behavior that goes with the moral statement, A or B? So that's my sort of view. It's a negotiated contract between a group of people. My sort of closing comment is around a languaging that Anita uses about curiosity. The curiosity is probably one of the most powerful states in order to shift many, many, many things. We've also had Larry talking about asking different questions. And for me, there's even using curiosity as part of that. When you ask a question, get curious about asking yourself, what is it about my way of being that has me asking that question? So that's about something called second order learning, which is essentially about who I am, the way I'm showing up, and even asking that question. So a lot of business and leadership literature talks about asking better questions. But that's probably the deepest question of all. Why do I ask that question? What is it about me that has asking that question in that way? I'll close off with that one.
Thanks, Graham. Where can people get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me. Best is to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Just search Graham Smale. You'll find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way. Otherwise, my email address is graham.smale@gmail.com.
Awesome. Graham, thank you for those words. We appreciate your time today. Tamu.
Thank you, Harry. Absolutely echo what Graham was saying. I think what I would add to the conversation about you know, leadership and so forth and moving forward is, in addition to curiosity, I would say imagination is an undervalued commodity. People have to be able to imagine the kind of organizational culture that they think would best benefit them. And they need to be, of course, in spaces that are safe for them to fully evoke that sense of imagination. So I would offer that as an additional tool that I think could really lend some value. And then in terms of ethics, one of the things that strikes me about conversations about ethics is, you know, we are always, I think the world today and for many, you know, decades has put forth the notion of always being open to other ideas and other perspectives. And I think it recently even kind of derailed into, you know, someone invoked the idea of alternative facts, you know. In other words, you know, there's been space open for every kind of notion about, you know, what someone thinks is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. But so much so to where I think it almost requires courage to be able to say, that is not the right thing to do, or this is the wrong thing to do. So I would offer the notion that that moving forward in ways that does all of the things that we've been talking about, but that focuses on doing things the right way is the courage to stand up, to not just identify it and keep quiet about it, but to stand up and say, no, that's not the right way, and this is the right way. Or in the face, again, of maybe there are many right ways, but we at least can say that's wrong. So I will leave it at that and express my heartfelt gratitude for everything that's been offered today and the graciousness of you, Harry and Anita, as our hosts.
So great.
Oh, you can find me, sorry, you probably asked me this question.
Yes, please.
You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you look me up, and in the About section, I get to talk about what I do and what my approach is. Thank you very much.
Well, just looking at our engagement on our social media platforms and on the group here, we've certainly had a number of people just saying how enlightened they have seen this process. And we have a person by the name of Willie Kingsley saying, take a bow, each of the really special panelists have had my eyes open big time. I really believe that's why all of us do this. That is why we are here, is to help folks and to power people. And we're on this collective journey, like Anita said. You know, we are here to learn from each other. The questions have been fantastic. Anita, don't you want to close us out with some comments? And I will then close us off after you've spoken.
Thank you so much, Harry. So my message on ethics, it's not an intellectually clever one. I think this is something that a lot is spoken about, and unashamedly ethical. You guys are the experts, which is why I brought you into the Master Leader program, Harry, is to talk about ethics on the program, just by the way.
There we go.
But in essence, I'm taking a very deeply personal viewpoint. If someone had to ask me that question, this is my response. I go to my heart and I sit with whatever the event or the situation that is posing. And it's a moral compass. Does it feel good, what I'm about to do or say, if it's my actions that I'm about to take, or commenting or receiving something else out there? Or does it feel harmful? And for me, there's something about the intentionality, about the choice of action that I'm about to take. And it's really, is this going to be uplifting, of good, of help? Or does it have a tinge of perhaps selfishness or own interest or greed that ultimately is going to create harm, even if the other person is not overtly aware of it, or the other organization, or whatever the situation is? But it's really going back to that inner moral compass that I think each of us have residing in the core of our hearts. And then there's a knowingness there if something is right, if it feels right and it sits right for you as an individual. And then as a collective, as a team, possibly engaging further, because there could be what is a darker shade of gray or a lighter shade of gray or a black or a white, quite different, you know, I'm talking about perspectives now. And to my colleagues' points, getting curious around that and hearing and taking in those viewpoints, but ultimately, how does it sit and land for you? So that's my take on ethics. Then just in a final closing to everyone who's joined today, we have a free assessment that is available for you to take. There are no strings attached. You can find it on our website, futureleadership.co.za. And it really is going to give you your own snapshot in terms of how ready are you as a conscious leader leading in today's global era. So feel free to take the test. The report will get emailed back to you, and yeah, take it and see. So that's the gift on offer for you guys today. And thank you. It's been a wonderful hour and a half spent. Again, Harry, thanks for inviting us on, and all the best to everyone out there. Take care.
Thank you so much, Anita. Panelists, it's been a privilege, and I'll be sure to engage with you offline and just convey my deep felt gratitude for your time. I want to respect everybody's time. We've gone a few minutes over, and my apologies for that. Folks, we are wrapping up this webinar, and I trust that you will reflect back on this often as we seek to promote ethics, values, and clean living collectively. If you want to engage with us by either being a voice for Unashamedly Ethical, so we speak about communicating, advocating, or educating. If you want to play in those three spaces with us, please visit our website to engage further. We have posted a number of links in the chat and on our social media pages, just showcasing some of our panelists and what they're up to. If you want to engage with them, they very graciously have offered that to you as well. I want to encourage you to go and visit Anita's just toolkit that she's allowed us here in this assessment. I think this is a great opportunity for us just to take that moment and reflect. I want to ask that you keep our social media pages on your notifications and keep them up and running, because we have Unashamedly Ethical Ghana doing a webinar for us probably in September. And then in October, we are doing another seminar that focuses a little bit about the history of corruption and how anti-corruption has been the antidote to that, but how does that look and how has that played out through history, and what does that look like today? So we're excited about the future and engaging with you as our audience. Please reach out to us again on our social media, on email, on websites. Thank you, everybody, and have a blessed day further.